Continuing on in our series of available alternatives to hard-to-find bottles, this is Weller Full Proof. I'm going to give you 5 alternatives without the endless hunting or shelling out a ton of cash. Stay tuned after the break and we'll talk about it. So as I always like to start these videos, I want to talk about what Weller Full Proof is so that we can talk about the profile and then start to figure out what we think are available alternatives to it. So by the stats, Weller Full Proof is a 114 proof wheated bourbon out of Buffalo Trace Distillery. It is the same mash bill as the Pappy Van Winkle lineup and the rest of the Weller lineup. It was at one point owned by Stitzel Weller, who also owned Old Fitz, storied distillery, sold off some of their holdings, eventually got to Buffalo Trace where they make it now. We do not know the mash bill, but we can assume it is a high corn, relatively low wheat, and a healthy amount of malted barley. Just based on rumors, I would bet that it is probably around the 8 to 10% malted barley and somewhere around the 15 to 20% wheat. 70, 20, 10, something like that. That will come to play when we talk about some of the alternatives and what they are. We'll talk about mash bills too, because mash bills are a super interesting thing. And especially in wheated, I think the wheat percentage matters as much, if not more, than rye in a rye bourbon. Entry proof is 114 for all Weller products, and I think all Buffalo Trace wheated. So this is full proof, meaning it is proofed back up to barrel entry proof. There's a bunch of different terms. None of them are regulated, but that is what we assume to be true, even though they don't necessarily have to stick to it because it is not a TTB regulated term. What I view the profile on Weller as, it is explosive. When you first sip Weller Full Proof, it is a pop of flavor on your palate. It is very fruit forward, a lot of grapes, your cherries, something to that effect, and then a fair amount of like dark brown sugar molasses that then kind of transitions into oak and leather. These aren't, I don't think, that old. I would imagine they're probably 6 to 8 years old, something like that. Because if it gets too much further up, it's probably going to end up in Old Rip Van Winkle or being held for a longer period of time and going into some of the higher Pappy lineup. All Weller Full Proof is non-chill filtered, which is interesting because that is something that people really search for in Weller Antique picks. It's on the back label. It is across the board. All Weller Full Proof is non-chill filtered. Basically what that means is there's a little bit of extra flavor because the chill filtration process kind of freezes some of those fatty acids and filters them out. Those are part of the taste profile. If you stick it in a freezer though, it will clump and it will look disgusting. So don't put your Weller Full Proof in a freezer, or, use it to start your lawnmower like Bruzel. So this is tied for my favorite of the Weller lineup that's decently available. Actually, I think it might be tied for my favorite of the Weller lineup, not named William LaRue Weller. I like this for different reasons than I like the old Weller Antique. If you have not seen my alternatives to Weller Antique, you can check them out here. What it boils down to when I'm trying to create alternatives for this is I want fruity, I want leather and oaky notes, and maybe a little brown sugar molasses, something like that. And then I want 114 or probably more, or at least drinks hotter than 114 proof. So as we kind of figure out what we're looking for here, we are also going to start talking about things that are similar. Let's get to what I think are the actual contenders and the ones that you can use that give you a similar profile. So the first one is one that I physically don't have, but I have had. It is Wilderness Trail wheated bourbon. There's a bunch of picks out there. I don't know if it's just single barrels or what they have. I'm not well versed in Wilderness Trail, but I have had a few Wilderness Trails that I do think tasted more like Weller because they have a good amount of fruity notes. They have a good amount of like that leather, caramel, oak to them, and some of them are actually pretty old. There's one that I'm looking up on Sealbox right now. It's 118.2 proof. I think that would be really good as a Weller alternative. It's $75. It might actually pull the trigger on this myself if I wasn't going to Kentucky Bourbon Fest next week. The mash bill that they run is 64% corn, 24% wheat, 12% malted barley, and I like a lot about that. It might be a little bit high on the wheated percentage, but it's not bad. There's some MGP wheated bourbon that's 45% wheat that I think is too much. This, I think, fits more towards that Weller profile. Somewhat sight unseen, but I think some of the picks have a lot of the qualities that Weller Full Proof has, and it fits a lot of my check boxes, being wheated, not a humongous amount of wheat in the mash bill. It's very close in proof. Similarly aged. I think a lot of the Wilderness Trail picks are between 5 and 8 years old. Definitely something to look for when you are looking to replace Weller Full Proof, and I think it is a good baseline offering that you can find most places, not Pennsylvania unless you're buying it on some place like Sealbox. You can find it in New Jersey, Maryland, I'm pretty sure Delaware. If you're in PA, you have to look to probably ship it in or go out of state. But that is my first one. So the next one would be Larceny Barrel Proof. So Larceny Barrel Proof is a product of the Heaven Hill Distillery, and a lot of people really put Heaven Hill and Buffalo Trace as the clash of the titans in the bourbon world. Not uncommon to see a Buffalo Trace offering put up against a Heaven Hill offering. This one, I don't even know what batch this is. This is B521. I would say the ones that are lower proof tend to be closer to Weller because I think a lot of these Larceny barrel proofs drink above their proof. I don't know if it's Rickhouse position or age or some combination of the mash bill and the yeast that they use, but they do tend to drink a little bit hotter than their proof. The mash bill that they run is 68% corn, 20% wheat, 12% malted barley. I like a lot of things about that, like I did with the Wilderness Trail mash bill. Right around 20% is where you want to be, and then that 12% malted barley that Heaven Hill runs, I actually think is the best thing that they do. Gives it a nice, thick, coating mouthfeel. Generally, the higher in malted barley you are, the higher that you have that thick coating mouthfeel. And then there's a point where the taste of malted barley starts taking over. And if you don't like Scotch, you're not going to like that. This, I think, is a nice middle ground, and I think it is one that you can reach for and have a lot of the similar elements. The thing that is missing to put this up against Weller Full Proof all the time is the fruit notes. There is not generally a lot of fruit notes in Larceny, and there's generally a lot of baking spices. Some people might prefer this. That's not what I'm saying. That's just my experience. Your experience may vary. But for me, that is the second, moving closer to the Weller Full Proof, in my opinion. And then this one has actually made both lists. This is Maker's Mark Cask Strength. Maker's Mark Cask Strengths generally come in somewhere around 110 proof. Their mash bill is 70% corn, 16% wheat, 14% malted barley. So you're seeing a lot of the same mash bill offerings, and that's kind of where I think Weller is probably close to some of these. It has a lot of the similar offerings. Sometimes there's a little bit more cherry, sometimes there's a little bit more baking spices, sometimes they're a little lacking in oak, but they have all of the same basic flavor elements that Weller Full Proof has. Sometimes they lack a little bit of the complexity, but it is also $5 cheaper MSRP and a whole lot cheaper if you buy Weller Full Proof on secondaries. Some are going to be really, really close. Some aren't going to be close at all. It's going to depend on the batch. So if you find a batch that you think is really like Weller Full Proof, you stock up. That is number 3. We're getting closer yet. And this one actually might come as a surprise to some people, but I need to kind of explain myself on this. This is Rebel Bourbon. This is specifically, I believe, the cask strength. Now, this is the old Distillers collection. So the Distillers collections were what the cask strength is now. And let me tell you, if you run into these old Distillers collections, buy them up. The new cask strength collection is not nearly as good, to the point where I've been talking to some store owners who are doing store picks, and they say they won't even pick a barrel of it now because the quality is just not there. So if you find older picks, especially in the 2022 and before age range, that is definitely something you want to pick up. Believe it or not, they're sourced from the Larceny mash bill from Heaven Hill. That's very, very hush-hush, but it's for sure what they're doing. Going forward, I think they're going to be MGP sourced now that they are owned by MGP. I think as of the last I heard, they are still getting rid of the last of their Heaven Hill stock. They come in all at 113 proof, so 1 proof point different than Weller. I think there's even a fair amount of these out there that could beat Weller in a blind. And now it seems like MGP's doing some weird stuff with them, trying to shutter their quality maybe a little bit in favor of getting some of the barrels that they don't want out of there so that they can switch over. It's a rough time to be a Rebel fan, but maybe there's some light up ahead. So that is my second closest. Now, there is one honorable mention here that a lot of people talk about. I don't think they're particularly close, although I have not had a whole lot of them. Old Elk Wheated Bourbon. I have heard a lot of people say that there's very similar things in them to Weller Full Proof, although the ones that I have tried tend to be more like wheat cracker, wheat thins, frosted mini wheat tasting. Part of that is because of the mash bill they use. They run MGP's high rye or high wheat mash bill. It's, I believe, 51.45.4. If you like that more than Weller, that's fine. But the conversation in this isn't things I like better than Weller. It is things that I find close to Weller. So there are a ton of bourbons out there that I do like better than Weller. This video is, if you like Weller, here are things like it, not naming 5 bourbons that I like better than Weller. You can play that game all day, but really, if the person doesn't agree with you, it's a wasted video. So I'm not trying to be that. I'm trying to be, here's things that I find are close. And the thing that I find to be the closest, Holladay Soft Red Wheat. So this is the Rickhouse proof. It comes in at 119.8 proof, or at least this one does. And I think it gives you a very similar flavor profile, even maybe a little bit more oak. It's like $65. It's not available here in PA unless you grab it on like Sealbox. They're all at least 6 years old. Some of them are probably a little bit older. These come from middle floors predominantly, well, actually entirely. They're Rickhouse C floor 3 and 4, so middle floors. You generally, I think wheateds, you don't want to do top floor if you can help it, just because I think a lot of that oak can overwhelm the profile real quickly. I think this is one that could very easily beat Weller Full Proof in blinds for a lot of people. So if you have not picked one up and you are in a place where you can do so, cannot recommend any more. Pick up a Holladay Soft Red Wheat. It is fantastic. So I think this is a really fantastic option. If you are looking to replace Weller with something that's way more available and cheaper if you're buying secondary, if you're in a magical place where you can buy Weller Full Proof at MSRP all the time, I'm not even sure why you're watching this video, unless you super don't like Weller Full Proof. Weller is a great bourbon. It's fantastic at $50, but people are paying $200 plus for it, and it's insane. This is not a $200 bottle. It is a $50 bottle. I don't think it gives you the quality of a $200 bottle. If you like this video, I would love to hear what you guys think are alternatives for Weller Full Proof. Definitely drop those in the comments and we'll have a conversation about it. Upcoming, we've got, at the end of the week, the Fantasy Whiskey Draft. If you have not checked that out, it is one that I think a lot of people will enjoy. We got some friends coming along. We've got Bourbon Bill. We've got Chris from Bourbon of the Week. We've got Chris and Sherry from Bourbon Besties and a couple of our friends from the 717 Bourbon Society. And we figured out how to have an actual champion not voted by public opinion, and it's going to be awesome. You can click here and hit notify me. It starts at 8 o'clock on September 7th, and it's going to be a fun time. Highly recommend you check back. Also, I am going to Kentucky Bourbon Fest next week, so be sure that you are following me on Instagram. The link is in the description to this video. Go to my link tree and it shows all of my social media presence. Have a little fun with it, and we are doing a pick while we're down there, so it is my first pick experience, and I'm hopefully going to document a good amount of that, and I think it's going to be a fun time. If you like this content, check out our other videos. Please like and comment on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us out a ton, and we hope you'll join us in drinking like a gentleman. Cheers. Make sure my beard's fluffed out because that was leaning over to the side the last time. Can't have a fluffy beard, that's for sure. You know, otherwise you get called out on the internet for needing to fix your beard. Pretty dang close to me.